Good morning, everyone. In the last meeting, we learned the Renaissance, right? Middle Age and the Renaissance. So the Renaissance was the one of the most biggest culture movement in the Western history during the 15th to 17th century. So we're gonna see after the Renaissance art movement, like the 70s, 17th and 18th centuries art movement. So after Renaissance, there were two major art movements. So one is Baroque and the other one is Rococo. So let's see the background history, how the art movement came from. So the period of 17th and the 18th century in Europe is called the Age of Kings. Some of the most powerful rulers in history occupied the thrones of various countries during this time. This same period could equally be called the Age of Colonial Settlement. The Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, and the French had established permanent settlements in North and South America. Baroque art was an art movement during the turbulent 17th and 17th centuries. Baroque art differs from that of the Renaissance. So that is the key of this chapter. Baroque art is full of emotion, energy, and movement. So we will see how Baroque art is different with the Renaissance. So the colors are more vivid in Baroque art than in Renaissance art, with greater contrast between colors and between light and dark. Baroque art has been called dynamic, sometimes even theatrical. In architecture and sculpture, where the Renaissance sought a classical simplicity, the Baroque favored ornamentation as rich and complex as possible. So let's compare the Renaissance and the Baroque art styles. So let's see the architecture style first. The left one. One second, let me just turn on my highlighter. So the left one is the Renaissance architecture style, and the right one is Baroque architecture style. So everyone, can you find the difference between these two styles? What's the difference?
The Renaissance is more simple and the Baroque has more details.
That's right. That's right. So as you can see, the Renaissance architecture looks very, organized and balanced and logical and classical. On the other hand, the Baroque architecture shows very, detailed, like, ornamentational and sophisticated. Very good. Now let's look at these two sculptures. The left one is Michelangelo, the Renaissance master's David statue in the Renaissance era. And the right one is Gian Lorenzo Bernini's Saint Teresa of the Baroque era. So of course, these two sculptures are amazingly beautiful and reach the highest technique in fine art. But the first feeling for these two sculptures are totally different. Can you find the difference between these two sculptures?
One looks posed, so the Renaissance looks posed, and the other one looks like an actual scene of like life. It's not posed, it's like candid.
Very good. I got the point. Very good. So the Michelangelo's David statue shows the beauty of balance, and it shows ideal beauty. And it is very bright to celebrate the hero. On the other hand, the Baroque sculpture Saint Teresa is dramatic, even theatrical, and it shows heavy light contrast by locating the sculpture in the dark spot and using window light through the top of the roof. So that is one of the features of the Baroque art. Very good. Now let's see paintings. The left one is the Renaissance masters, the Raphael's painting, the School of Athens. And the right one is Peter Paul Rubens, the Raising of the Cross from the Baroque. So can you find the differences? What's the difference?
Is it the lining, like one is vertical and then the other one is like diagonal?
Wow, yes, very good point. Yes, it is. So because since this painting looks like a horizontal, so it looks very calm. On the other hand, this Raising of the Cross painting has lots of diagonal lines, so looks very dynamic, very good. So the Raphael's painting is basically following the left one, perspective role. Now the 1-point perspective, which means it is very well balanced, and it is calm, peaceful, bright, and logical. On the other hand, the Rubens painting, the right one, is focused on the subject, not really follow the perspective role, and it shows deep contrast with the bright highlight and very dark shadow. So also the movement is dynamic, and the whole painting mood is very emotional. So this is important. To conclusion, the Renaissance art shows stillness, logicality, peace and calm, classicism, and brightness. And Baroque art shows motion, emotion, turbulence, grandeur, and contrast. So now we are going to see two Baroque artists based on this Baroque art features. The first Baroque artist is Caravaggio. Caravaggio was an Italian painter. His paintings combine a realistic observation of the human state, both physical and emotional, which with the dramatic use of lighting. So this is his painting. Looks amazing, right? So he picked the painful moment when Jesus Christ got the crown. He is one of the most famous Baroque artists. So look at the beautiful, beautiful lighting and the beautiful skin texture. He's an amazing artist, we can say. And except for the technique, the painting's emotion is also realistic. So it feels like we are in the middle of the painful moment. And this painting is about Saint Thomas checking Jesus' wound here with a surprised, profound face. Oh, and this is Caravaggio's another biblical episode painting. Judith saved her people by seducing and beheading the Assyrian general Holofernes. The same topic was depicted in Renaissance era, which is the left painting. So Judith, here, this girl, the Judith in the left painting looks very peaceful and calm. It is hard to believe she's after the battle. So even she looks now even elegant. On the other hand, the Caravaggio's painting it's very dramatic and dynamic with the detailed description. So it is capturing the moment of the event. So that's the difference. And this is David with the head of Goliath by Caravaggio. So this same theme made by different era. Of course, the Renaissance master, Michelangelo. So even though Michelangelo and Caravaggio depicted the same David in their work of art, their Davids look totally different. Michelangelo's David is made as a hero, and he has an idealized body because he's a hero. On the other hand, the Caravaggio's David doesn't have an ideal body, just depicted as as a normal human being. Also, Caravaggio shows the moment David took the Goliath's head with unpleasant feeling. Now let's move on to the next Baroque artist, Rembrandt. Rembrandt was a Dutch draftsman, painter, printmaker. He is generally considered one of the greatest visual artists in the history of art and the most important figure and artist in Dutch art history. So this Rembrandt's largest and the most famous painting was made for one of the three headquarters of Amsterdam's civic guard. So these groups of civilian soldiers defended the city from attack. Rembrandt was the first to paint all of the figures in a civic guard in action. He has an excellent technique to capture a moment in his painting. We can see the wild sea in a storm. So feels like looks like a rage of the sea. The Rembrandt was very famous with his self-portrait styles. He settled the traditional portrait manner in terms of pose, light, and mood. So many of artists followed this portrait painting style. There is a video about Rembrandt in the Moodle page. So please watch it to see diverse his beautiful work of art. Now, let's see the next art movement, Rococo. The age of Rococo is a development and extension of the Baroque style. The term Rococo was played on the word Baroque, but also it refers to the French word for rocks and shells, forms that appears as decorative motif in architecture, in furniture, and in painting. The Rococo's subject mood of art, the subject and the mood of art is slightly different from the Baroque, even though it is an extension of the Baroque. Like Baroque, Rococo is an extravagant, ornate style, but there are several points of contrast. Baroque was an art of cathedral and palaces. On the other hand, Rococo was more intimate, suitable for the aristocratic home and drawing room. Also, Baroque is large in scale, massive, dramatic. Rococo has a smaller scale and a light-hearted, playful quality. So let's see the examples. So the left one is the Baroque style architecture, and the right one is one of the Rococo style architecture. So these are all very complicated, but we can see the differences. What's the difference, everyone?
The use of color, one is like has more vibrant light colors, airy, and the other one is like deeper colors.
Very good. Exactly. The left one, Baroque style, is dark but grandeur. However, the Rococo style is bright and feminine and sophisticated.
I just have a quick question.
Mhm.
Are these both paintings?
Oh, these are all the architecture. The church.
Oh, okay. I was like, this looks so real. Okay.
Mhm. The left one is the church's interior, and the right one is the palace's interior. And these are paintings. So let's look at these paintings. The left one is Baroque style, the Caravaggio's painting, the David. And the right one is Rococo style painting. So these two paintings are well using deep contrast lighting technique, but seems a little bit different, right? What's the difference?
One seems more happier and the other one is more like tragic.
Exactly. Very good. So most of the Baroque art describe the biblical episode. Also, it's very heavy and dark and serious. However, the Rococo's painting depicts daily life and nature of novels, and it shows light and bright and very lovely. So let me share a video to see a beautiful Rococo work of art. All right. So we just watched the lovely local work of art. So related to this 17th and 18th chapter, we have a sketchbook project. We're gonna do a hand drawing. So we just learned the Baroque art styles, right? So we are going to apply their art styles into your hand drawing. So there are 5 Baroque art features we learned. It has motion, emotion, turbulence, grandeur, and contrast. So please draw your hand based on 2 or 3 of Baroque art features. So excuse me, you will need a sketchbook, pencil, eraser, and any color medium you have. This work can be black and white or color, or digital version will be fine. And as usual, please write which Baroque art styles features you applied in your hand drawing with a short description when you post your work process in the Moodle room by this Monday. So let me share the examples. So this hand drawing shows motion, right? It has a movement and a contrast, like the lightness and the darkness. These are all the Baroque art styles. Oh, looks creative, right? So this hand drawing shows also motion, sort of emotion, and the contrast with the lighting. Also, this hand drawing shows emotion and grandeur and the contrast with this using this strong lightness. Oh, looks a little bit creepy. So it's not a drawing, but I took this as an example to show the motion and the turbulence, and also creativity. And this drawing shows motion and emotion. Also, this hand drawing shows emotion and turbulence. And this hand drawing shows motion, grandeur, and contrast. Seems like it used colored pencil. So like this example, you don't need to make a very, traditional or, observational hand drawing. You can make a very creative drawing like this. And these hand drawing shows motion, emotion, and contrast. And this hand drawing shows grandeur and contrast. And the emotion I can see. Oh, I love this drawing. This hand drawing shows motion and emotion. And this hand drawing shows motion, emotion, turbulence, and the contrast of Baroque art style, plus created. Oh, so this hand drawing shows emotion and grandeur. And this hand drawing definitely shows motion, emotion, turbulence, and contrast, just like the Baroque art. This hand drawing shows motion and emotion. And this hand drawing shows motion and emotion and sort of contrast. This hand drawing shows emotion, grandeur, and contrast. So that's it. Do you have any question about this project?
No.
No. All right. So By this Monday, please post your work process here, week 11-1. And again, we have an assignment 2. The due date is by coming Monday, March 28th, which is a virtual museum tour. So please submit your paper on time. Otherwise, you're going to lose 5 points. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break and we're going to continue to learn the modern art. Everyone, please come back by 9:07. All right, so let's see the next chapter, modern art. So, there are so many art movements in this chapter, modern art. We're gonna see the half of the art movement, and then we will see the rest of the art movement in the next meeting. So let's see what the modern art is. So the modernity in Europe and North America reflected the emergence of a new kind of society in the wake of the French, American, and industrial revolutions. So we're gonna see the the art history after the colonial settlement, like the Baroque and the Rococo art movement. So driven by technological progress, characterized by the rapid change, the 19th century gave birth to our industrialized middle-class culture of mass production. Also, the mass advertising and the mass consumption, so including the mass consumption of leisure activities such as shopping, going to entertainment, and visiting art museums. Do you know what it is? It looks familiar, right? It's an art museum in Paris. It's a Louvre museum. So the art museums themselves were a development of the 19th century, and they made art available to the public in a way we now take for granted. So the first national museum in the world was the Louvre Museum in Paris, this one. So art was now for everybody, no longer by the church or by the nobility. So many of scholars agree that, excuse me, modern art started from Louvre Museum in 1793. And it ended after World War II. But here, so all right. So the modern art is about this time period, and it is divided as 2 periods, like before avant-garde and after the avant-garde. So we're gonna learn what the avant-garde is in the next meeting. So we learned the photography before, right? Do you remember it? First photograph in the world, daguerreotype, came out of the world during this modern time. As a photograph had developed, many artists abandoned the traditional art style, and they tried to make a new art style because the traditional art was not meaningful anymore, thanks to the invention of a camera. That also happened during this time period Here is a daguerreotype and the Kodak. But the beginning of the modern art movements were still realistic. And their arts were based on the observation, because the photograph's development was just a baby step. Before the Kodak, we learned the photograph equipment are so heavy, and it takes like 8 hours to take one picture. So it was like a baby step. So it was threatening for painters that much. However, after daguerreotype, the photograph's development was accelerated, and by 1888, Kodak invented portable camera, and everyone could record their mundane life. So the artists needed something new rather than the realistic art. So that art movement is called avant-garde. Something new means newest art. And after avant-garde, the art history began to write a totally different story. So here's the avant-garde, and before the avant-garde art movement, there were 3 major art movements: realism, impressionism, post-impressionism. And after avant-garde, diverse art movements arose, like Fauvism, expressionism, cubism, futurism, Dada, surrealism, and idealism. So today we're gonna see these 3 art movements before the avant-garde. So let's see the realism first. A number of artists broke away from the traditions of earlier 18th and 19th century art to create objective representations of the real world. The movement called realism refers specifically to writers and artists in France who were concerned about achieving social change after the revolution of 1848. So realist artists sought to depict the everyday and ordinary rather than heroic or historic or exotic. So their works unmasked for art viewers the true lives of middle and lower classes. So this is a realism artist, Honor Dormier's lithography printing work of art. We saw this work before when we learned contextual analysis before. So he recorded a historically terrible event in this work. So I'm going to just skip this part. And let's see another realism work of art. So everyone, let's see this painting closer. What's the theme of this painting? Can you guess the subject of this painting? What are they doing? No one's here?
It looks like they're like digging for something, maybe like digging for gold or diamonds or something.
Exactly. Yes. So this painting, Stonebrokers, was shocking for its depiction of working class people on a large sized canvas. Look at the size of the canvas. It's a huge canvas. A scale normally reserved for the heroic subject matter of history paintings. So the Corbett, the artist, this painting highlights the backbreaking, monotonous work of the poor. The breaking of stones was a job taught by older generations to young men, and it was a job a man would have for a lifetime. The painting shows an older worker and his young assistant as powerful and unrelenting qualities that alarmed the upper classes. And a year before, Corbett painted this work in the revolution working conditions and to low pay. Now let's see the Impressionism. So the artists who came to be called Impressionists worked in individual, sometimes very different styles, but they were united in rejected the formal approach of the art taught in the academy in Paris. Their art attempted not so much to portray exactly and realistically such scenes as a landscape or life in a city as to capture the light and sensations produced by the scene. The Impressionists formed a group to show their work together outside the official salon in 8 exhibitions held between 1874 and 1886. So their subject matter was a scenes of everyday life, rural landscapes, and life in the modern and growing cities of France. Impresses were often intent on capturing the essence of a moment in time. So before the Impressionists, artists who followed the traditional method of painting gave their work a smooth surface. But the Impressionists chose to reveal their brush stroke just like this painting. And the almost sketch, unfinished appearance of many Impressionist works break away from the academic tradition of implying creating an illusion of three-dimensional surface on the canvas. Instead, Impressionists flattened the surface, welcomed texture created by the paint, and often allowed the canvas to be seen beneath the painting. So many Impressionist paintings do indeed have an apparently unfinished quality because the artists are interested in capturing instantaneous moment rather than capturing a highly finished, technically flawless piece of work. So now we are going to see 3 Impressionist artists, Claude Monet and Edward Manet and Lenoir. So let's see Edward Manet first. So Edward Manet was a French modernist painter. He was one of the first 19th century artists who paint modern life and pivotal figure in the tradition from realism to impressionism. So let's talk about this painting. Can you read this painting? Can you find the artist's intention of this painting?
I'm a little, I don't know. It's like, I mean, the woman being naked is throwing me off when the men are clothed and the woman in the background has her clothes on. So I don't know what I'm seeing here.
Elisa, you just said the same answer with me. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. So as we see, Manet's paintings are very hard to read. So why this front woman is naked and posed like that? And where is she looking at? Huh? It seems like she's staring at us, right?
Mhm.
And why these men are dressed up and act like there are only two of them? And what
That
is
might be some sort of like, I don't know, maybe like a advertising like prostitution or something. 'Cause
oh,
it looks like the guys are like, 'cause they're clothed and they're like, she's obviously naked. So I don't know, like if they're just giving her away.
I love that. It's possible. Yes, very possible. Mm-hmm.
It's funny because it looks like they're just having common conversation. Like his hand is like he's expressing something like just like, "Hey, so how's the weather?" And it's just like, "What? She's there naked." What?
It's very, odd setting. Yeah. It's very odd, but interesting. Yeah.
And is the woman in the background just holding her dress, or could she be pregnant back there?
Maybe. Or I don't know. Maybe I don't know why she's back there in the pond
Well,
or
the way her hand is under, I can't tell if it's holding the dress or a
Yeah.
belly in the dress.
it can be. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. So as we can see, Manet's painting is odd. And art historians still debate just what he meant by it. So in modeling the figures, Manet focused on the highest and the lowest values, all but eliminating the middle and transitional tones. So as a result, look at this woman. So the forms such as the nude, woman's body appear flattened as though illuminated by a sudden flashlight. So I'm going to share a video to see this work of art in detail.
We're in the Musée d'Orsay, looking at Déjeuner sur l'herbe, luncheon on the grass.
By Manet, although it didn't originally have that title. Its first title was The Bath.
And there is really neither bathing nor a luncheon going on. There is a woman in the distance, in the water. There is some fruit and a brioche, a roll in the foreground, so perhaps a remnant of a lunch, but that's not what this painting is about.
But it's very difficult to determine precisely what this painting is about, and I think that's part of the point. The painting was exhibited not at the official salon sanctioned by the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, the authority for art. Instead, this was exhibited at the Salon des Refusés.
The Salon des Refusés was set up by Emperor Napoleon III because so many works of art had been excluded from the official salon. But even though this painting was in the exhibition of rejected artwork, it still caused a storm of controversy based both on what was being portrayed, but also its painting technique, how it was portrayed.
These figures are clearly modern Parisian figures.
And that's the problem.
They're not set far away in ancient Greek and Roman mythology or set back in time. These are figures clearly wearing fashionable Parisian clothing, except, of course, the nude woman, which is the other part of the problem.
By placing a woman who is nude in this context, and because she's not veiled or distanced by mythology, she's not a nymph in a classical grove, she is actually a recognizable figure. This is Manet's model, Victorine Moron, and because the two men are also recognizable figures, there is an immediacy here that creates a degree of discomfort for the viewer.
These figures don't look idealized. They don't look timeless. They look like actual people you would see on the streets of Paris. The other significant problem with these three figures is that no one seems to be truly interacting. The nude female figure looks directly out at us in a gaze that is very nonchalant and yet very direct.
Which is also breaking with tradition. In the rare instances where a nude female figure would look out toward the audience, it might be with a coy look. But here there is a figure that's returning the viewer's gaze.
And then we have the two male figures. The figure on the right gestures toward the figure in the center, but the figure in the center seems to gaze absently out of the painting and doesn't seem to return the figure on the right's gesture and conversation. And then we have this odd odd figure in the background who's spatially too large for where she should be in the middle ground.
There are all kinds of spatial problems here that Manet has built in. These are not happenstance, these are purposeful. For example, the woman in the background seems to reach down to scoop something out of the water, but in fact she seems to be reaching down to the thumb of the man in the foreground, collapsing the last traces of the illusion of depth.
We also have figures who are rendered very flatly. So for example, the nude female figure is not modeled with that lovely movement from light to dark that would give her a sense of three-dimensionality that is typical of representations of the female nude historically. Critics noted that she seemed to have a kind of studio lighting about her instead of the natural outdoor light of where she's located.
There is some minor modeling around the breast, under the thigh, but for the most part she looks like she's a flat cutout.
And even those shadows are very dark. There's almost a sense of her being outlined in dark grays and blacks instead of a lovely soft modeling. Overall, the handling of paint, whether we're looking at the grass in the foreground or the meadow in the distance, it's incredibly loosely brushed. There's no sense of finish. And for paintings that were approved by the jury for the Royal Academy, having a painting that was really worked on, where there was no sense left of the hand of the artist, that was the priority, and Manet is just flagrantly disregarding that. We also have a figure who seems naked and not nude, and that's because we have her discarded clothing, including her hat, in the foreground, and the fact that she's wearing a kind of ribbon. So we feel as though she's a modern Parisian woman who has discarded her clothing and not Venus, born nude naturally from the sea.
She's not an allegorical figure, she's not a mythological figure, she's somebody who has taken off her dress.
Manet is very consciously drawing on the tradition of art history here.
He understood traditional art. He had copied paintings at the Louvre.
And so this painting is based directly on at least two sources. A painting that was thought to be by Giorgione, now understood to be by Titian in the Louvre, which similarly shows two clothed male figures and two nude female figures in a beautiful landscape.
But Déjeuner sur l'Herbe is also inspired by a work by Raphael that Manet had seen through an engraved copy showing the Judgment of Paris, and in the lower right corner of that engraving were two river gods and a nymph, and it was that composition that Manet has borrowed.
So we can easily understand the reactions of the French public in 1863 when they went to the Salon des Refuses. In fact, Manet was cultivating their confusion. This refusal to tell a story is a refusal to do precisely what the Academy and especially the art-going public wanted from a painting.
Manet is teasing his viewers. He's giving all of the indications that there's a narrative and yet not including that narrative. And so the subject is then no longer what is being enacted, but rather the act of creating a work of art itself, the choices that he's making as an artist to his brushwork, to his composition.
He is making a challenge to the authorities that controlled art in France and making a strong declaration. I am the one who makes these decisions for my art.
And that forceful declaration will have a tremendous impact on the development of modernism in the late 19th century and into the 20th century.
Very interesting painting, right? All right. So, you remember this painting, right? So this one is also Edward Manet's painting. So we talked about this before, so I'm going to just skip this. All right, so let's see the next Impressionist artist, Claude Monet. So he stands like no other painter for the Impressionist style, and as the French master of light, he was also a central pioneer of 20th century painting. When Monet traveled to Paris to visit the Louvre Museum, he witnessed the painters copying from the old masters. However, Monet brought his paints and other tools with him and sit by a window and paint what he saw there. So Monet was in Paris for several years and met several painters who would become friends and fellow Impressionists. One of those friends was Edward Manet. This painting's title is Impression Sunrise. So, which is made by Claude Monet, first shown at what would become known as the exhibition of the Impressionists in Paris in April 1874. The painting is credited with inspiring the name of the Impressionist movement. Impressionism. Sunrise depicts a port in Monet's hometown. And Monet painted the same subject many times because the lights and sceneries are different by the time, the day, and the weather. And he liked to paint the nature views outside to capture all the different lighting while he was painting. And this is another beautiful landscape painting by Claude Monet. And he used the brush stroke speed to show the time. Through this painting, we even could feel the windy weather with the brush stroke. And Monet was diagnosed with nuclear cataracts in both eyes in 1912 at the age of 72. And his visual problems began much earlier. So soon after the age of 65, he began to experience changes in his perception of color. In his eye, everything looked blurry and yellowish and brownish to him. After he was diagnosed cataracts, he spent most of his time at his garden. And he left so many beautiful garden landscape paintings, and he died at 86. So I'm gonna share a video to see his beautiful landscape painting. Through his garden.
Comment je suis venu ici, c'est la destinée. C'est vrai. Je ne pensais pas m'occuper d'un jardin comme celui-ci. Monet a été une étape dans la peinture et son jardin en fait partie.
Look familiar? Welcome to the garden of none other than Claude Monet, the father of French Impressionism. Worldwide renowned painter who planted his own garden here in Giverny in 1883 and replicated it time and time again on canvases. And this is Gilbert. He's an artist in his own right. He has been responsible for the upkeep of Monet's garden for over 40 years. After the Second World War, the garden was left neglected. So in the 1970s, gardeners were called to the rescue.
Donc je suis venu travailler ici pour la restauration en 1976. Tout était mort. Donc il a fallu tout recommencer. J'avais un plan de rester 3 ou 4 ans, mais en fin de compte, j'y suis encore malgré ma retraite. Maintenant, c'est un jardin hyper connu et hyper fréquenté, plus de 600 000 visiteurs. En 6 mois, en ce moment, nous sommes 10 jardiniers à plein temps. Je suis retraité. Pour moi, c'est facile, j'habite à côté, donc de revenir dans le jardin. La journée commence à 7 h du matin pour l'été, pas l'hiver parce qu'il n'y a pas le soleil, on vit comme la lumière. On répare ce que les visiteurs ont cassé, certains partent couper les fleurs fanées, c'est très important. On fertilise, on arrose, c'est tout le travail d'un jardinier.
Gilbert wasn't the greatest connoisseur of Monet, but he got to know him through his garden.
C'est plutôt les fleurs qui m'intéressaient. Et petit à petit, j'ai appris à découvrir Monet donc, et aimer. C'est très important de préserver ce jardin parce qu'il a marqué l'histoire de la peinture. Le jardin, ça a été ma destinée.
It's a beautiful garden. All right, let's see the last Impressionist artist, Auguste Renoir. Renoir was a French artist who was a leading painter in the development of the Impressionist style. He depicted beauty and especially feminine sensuality. This painting is one of the Impressionism's most celebrated masterpiece. The painting depicts a typical Sunday afternoon at the original Moulin de Maigret in the district of Montmartre in Paris. In the late 19th century, working class Parisians would dress up and spend the time there, dancing, drinking, and eating, just like our life. He left us so many beautiful portrait paintings like this. So look at the brush strokes on our hair depiction. It is soft, very, but every single strokes are alive. And this is another portrait. This is unusual portrait style. The composition is not focusing on the figures nor the landscape, even the kid. So she doesn't show, like a full torso in this painting. And Renoir tried to create unique portrait styles in this painting. And he showed completed techniques as impressionist through his paintings. And there is a video to show his life with his masterpieces in the Modern page. So please watch it after this meeting. Now, let's see the last art movement, post-impressionism, before avant-garde. So the next generation of artists admired many aspects of Impressionism, especially its brightened palette and direct painting techniques. But they reacted in various ways to what they perceived as its shortcomings. Their styles are so highly personal that we commonly group them together under the neutral term post-impressionist, meaning simply the artist who came after Impressionism. So we are going to see three post-impressionism artists, Georges Seurat, Vincent van Gogh, and Paul Gauguin. So let's see Georges Seurat first. Georges Seurat wanted to place Impressionism's intuitive recording of optical sensations on a more scientific footing. His reading of color theories led him to develop the technique of pointillism, in which discrete dots and dashes of pure complementary colors were supposed to blend in the viewer's eyes. So this is it. We saw this painting before, right? So we learned his artistic technique in visual elements chapter for the optical color mixture. So he painted all the colors with color dots, but he didn't use direct colors. He used optical color mixture technique. So for example, to make green colors, he used yellow dots and blue dots. And when the lots of color dots put together, they create new colors. So let's see this painting, a little bit detail.
25th, 1841, Pierre Renoir.
I'm sorry. Let me just.
Some say they see poetry in my paintings. I see only science.
We're in the Art Institute of Chicago, and we're looking at Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of the Grand Jatte by Georges Seurat.
And that was a quote by Seurat, whose ambition was to bring science to the methods of Impressionism.
What's interesting is that the science that he was thinking about has been, to some extent, overturned, and we're left with the poetry.
The science that he was referring to had to do with ways of making the painting seem more luminous, to seem brighter.
And I have to say, he's really succeeded. This is a painting that is brilliantly luminous and incredibly complex when it comes to color. So he's taking the earlier traditions of the Impressionists and he's imposing on them the science of vision and especially the science of color that had been developed by people like Chevreul and Rude. He was interested in this idea of dividing color into its components. That is, instead of trying to find the perfect purple, which is really hard to do.
You mean when you mix it on your palette?
Well, that's right. And the reason is that when you take, say, a blue and a red, and you mix them together, that red is not pure red. It's got lots of other things in it. The blue is not pure, and when you mix them together, it gets too muddy. So how do you get a pure purple that you might see in nature? Well, Seurat's solution was to take the red, take the blue, and put them next to each other so that as your eye receives that light, the light waves do the mixing themselves.
Right, and this is called optical mixture, and this is really a change from academic technique of finding that local color of an object, mixing it on your palette and then applying it. And if you think back to the Impressionist project, that what the Impressionists sought after was to really create a sense of outdoor light. And I think using this divisionist method, this idea of optical mixture, Seurat really did that in the Grand Jatte. We have a real sense of Parisians outside on a sunny day and the real strong sense of sunlight streaming through the trees.
So clearly there is this bridge back to Impressionism, and in fact the artist used the term Neo-Impressionism when he described the kind of painting that he was doing. And yet this is also so far away from Impressionism. It's got the leisure of the Impressionist painting, it's got the outside, but this is not a painting that was painted plein air. This is not done directly before these subjects. He did do small sketches.
Actually dozens of drawings and oil sketches outside, that's right.
But then he goes back to the studio and makes this very composed, very carefully structured painting. In fact, he said that he wanted his figures to have the kind of solemnity that was found in the sculptures of the frieze of the Parthenon.
Right, so he's really wanting to bring a sense of timelessness and classicism to the art of Impressionism, and also, as you said, a sense of thoughtfulness, of composing, of not doing something spontaneous.
The figures are remarkably structured within this space, and the space itself is also remarkably organized.
And there's much more of an illusion of space than we would ever get in an Impressionist painting.
Well, almost going back to the classical tradition of landscape painting, of Claude or of Poussin, you have alternating shadow and light, which steps us back slowly into space.
And we also have a receding diagonal line that creates an illusion of space.
And yet at the same time, this is a painting because of its technique that really draws our eye to the surface of the canvas. So there's this really interesting tension that exists between this deep pictorial space and the very obvious, heavily worked surface. Let's go up really close and take a look. So I'm looking at the lower left corner of the painting, and I'm looking at the man who's smoking a pipe, leaning on his back. Take a close look at the way that his body is defined. You can see some of the earlier painting. I see blues, I see reds, and I see yellows, all fairly long strokes, but then I also see, painted over that, little points of color, of pinks and of blues as well, that Seurat actually added a bit later. And you can see that, especially in the shadows and the highlights at the top and the bottom, where Seurat, in a sense, creates a kind of volume.
And as we're looking at all of these different brush strokes that are layered one on the other, I'm also noticing how the figure has really clear contours, which is something that we don't see in Impressionism. So we have a sense of line here and a form defined by line, and even modeling, so the figure really seems three-dimensional. So we know that we're in the northwest of Paris, in a place that was frequented by the middle and upper classes for leisure. We know that the other side of the river was frequented more by working class figures. And so there's this question of what Seurat is saying about class and Paris in the 19th century.
And here, art historians really disagree. And it's in part because there's a lot of ambiguity. The ambiguity of class was an issue of his moment, of his time. Class was enormously important, and it had always been in French society absolutely clear. But the cities had a way now of mixing classes, and this was a modern phenomenon.
There was a way that clothing and fashion now blurred class distinctions that were more clear before. One of the things that Seurat is doing is he's confounding the expectations of a typical viewer in the end of the 19th century. So where someone would expect to see a narrative, a pretty story that was easily readable between the figures, a sense of sentiment or emotion, Seurat's not giving us that. We have figures who don't talk to each other, don't interact, we don't have a sense of a clear narrative. It just doesn't do what 19th century viewers wanted paintings to do.
And so this painting was a challenge not only for that typical viewer that you spoke of, but for the art community as well. When this painting was first exhibited in 1886, it caused a real stir, and artists divided into camps supporting it or detracting from it.
Well, it was so different than anything anyone was doing. I mean, it exploded what the most advanced art of the time was. At that point, in 1884 to 1886, the most advanced art was an impressionist technique of open brushwork, open contours, paintings painted on site, outside, en plein air, with a sense of spontaneity, capturing outdoor light. Seurat took all that and just turned it on its head and created something really serious and monumental and classical and thoughtful, and everyone had to come to terms with it.
All right. Now let's see Vincent van Gogh. So Vincent van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter who is among the most famous and influential figures in the history of Western art. In just over a decade, he created about 2,100 works, including around 860 oil paintings, and most of which date from the last 2 years of his life. Now, I'm the painter, I'm the artist. I know that number is almost impossible. He just, paint like every single day. Like, he didn't sleep that much, eat that much. He has to paint almost, every day. That is crazy number, I can say. So, the works include a landscape, still lifes, portraits, and self-portraits, and are characterized by bold colors and dramatic, impulsive, and expressive brush stroke that contributed to the foundations of modern art. Sadly, he was not commercially successful, and he's suicided at 37, came after years of mental illness and poverty. So this is a Starry Night, one of the most recognized painting in the history of Western culture. So it described the view from the east-facing window of asylum room just before sunrise, with the addition of an ideal village. This is his self-portrait when he had ear. This is his bedroom painting. So there is a video about this painting. So please watch that video to see this painting in detail. This is another his self-portrait painting after he lost his ear. He began to hallucinate and suffered an attack in which he lost consciousness. During one of these attacks, he used a knife to cut his ear. He could later recall nothing about the event. And let's see the last post-impressionist artist, Paul Gauguin. So Paul Gauguin worked in an impressionist style early in his career. Gauguin was interested in expressing the spiritual meaning in his art. All these he sought on the sun-drenched island of the South Pacific, where he journeyed to escape what he called the disease of civilization. So this is one of his famous painting, Tahitian. The brilliant high-key colors of his Tahitian paintings reveal his depth to Impressionism. To this lightened palette, he added his own innovations, flattened forms and broad color areas, a strong outline, tertiary color harmonies, a taste for an exotic, an aura of mystery, and quest for the primitive. The woman's pose is derived from Egyptian art, so the legs shown in profile and the shoulders depicted frontally. So Gauguin believed that European art had been in thrall for too long to the legacy of Greece and Rome, and he looked to the art of Egypt, Islam, and Asia to renew it. So there is a video in the Moodle Room page about his artistic journey based on his journal he left. So I need you to watch this video to understand this artist's creative viewpoint. And we're gonna continue to see the rest of the art movement in the next meeting next week. And we have a discussion related to this chapter by this Monday. So please read the ebook, page 519, and discuss why artists choose same themes and depict the themes differently.